In 2012, the United States Air Force celebrated its 65th birthday, September 18, 1947, when the Air Force detached from the Army to become a separate service. A birthday, of course, is all about history, so it makes sense to take a couple of minutes to look back at how the Air Force, and of course Edwards Air Force Base, have transformed since airmen first served here. So how did we get here? Rogers Dry Lake and the Mojave Desert's weather made for an ideal setting for training and testing aircraft. In 1933, the Army Air Corps deployed airplanes and airmen to what would become the Muroc Bombing and Gunnery Range, and later Edwards Air Force Base. So what was life like then? For one thing, there were no female airmen. The men were deployed from other bases and lived in tents without air conditioning. They lined up for meals at the mess tent. It was very much a remote expeditionary operation, something like what today's airmen might experience in the Middle East or Afghanistan. The lessons learned helped airmen prepare for future conflict, which came in 1941. The Second World War was a huge change for the Army's Air Force. While the pilot training continued, the Developmental Test and Evaluation mission arrived at Muroc Army Airfield. Engineers tested aircraft and bombs, and the 412th Fighter Group tested our nation's first jet fighters. The current 412th Test Wing traces its lineage to that unit. Then, as now, Edwards was on the forefront of aviation technology. Life on base changed during the war. New buildings appeared, some designed to serve as temporary housing during the war. Residents nicknamed their apartments kerosene flats because of the smell of oil used for heating and cooking. Women also served at Edwards during the war. The Muroc Women's Army Corps unit, called Provisional Detachment W, arrived for duty in January 1944. They worked in the base headquarters and had a separate dining facility. Throughout the years, women's roles increased at Edwards and across the Air Force, and eventually they became pilots and commanders. And this year, the Air Force saw its first female four-star general, the Air Force Materiel Command's new commander, General Janet Wolfenbarger. When Muroc became Edwards Air Force Base in 1948, the flight test mission was firmly established, bringing new combat capability to the Air Force. The lessons learned in controlling the X-1 in the first supersonic flights at Edwards were applied to the Century series of fighters of the 1950s. The first flights of the F-15 ushered in another new generation of air superiority fighters in 1972. Now we're testing the F-22 and F-35, as well as the B-1, B-2, C-17, and more. Experimental aircraft have remained an important part of the Edwards mission. The X-15 not only set new speed and altitude records in the 1960s, but also proved that a space shuttle could safely re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and land on a runway. Hypersonic research continues, and while the technology is new, engineers from the 1950s would recognize the methods employed today. The X-15 was carried to altitude by a B-52 bomber, and we still use a B-52 as a test platform today, most recently with the testing of another hypersonic test plane, the X-51A. As Edwards transformed from a wartime expeditionary base into a permanent installation, recreational facilities like the base library of the 1940s were replaced. The service clubs, where personnel socialized during the war, were replaced by the facilities we enjoy today. And a wave of new construction in the 1950s replaced kerosene flats with duplex houses that lasted until they were replaced in recent years. Well, a birthday is hardly a celebration without some home movies, and Edwards has long captured the imagination of the public for its role in advancing air and space technology. Among the many titles where Edwards served as a movie and television set is The Right Stuff, which was filmed right here in 1982. For more than 6 decades, the men and women of Edwards Air Force Base have proven they indeed have the right stuff by continually developing, testing, and delivering war-winning capabilities to the men and women of the United States Armed Forces and its allies. And because of this dedication, the Air Force is able to fly, fight, and win both today and tomorrow.